Welcome to your Healing Place podcast with Linda and Mindy. It is our desire to address common concerns of how abortion and faith intersect in order to validate the emotional pain and grief that abortion can bring and give hope that recovery is possible. Welcome to your Healing Place podcast with Linda and Mindy. We are here today and we're going to be discussing some interesting scientific research that's being done and being discovered regarding the connection or the physiological bond that happens before we even know we're pregnant with our children. So I think there's two aspects, there may be more, but that really impress me or I don't know, amaze me, I guess. And one is that when that baby is formed and it's moving into the uterus, it at some point early on, again, we don't even know we're pregnant. Its cells, the baby's cells and the mother's cells from her bodies begin to work together to form the placenta. So the mom can't form that organ by herself, and the baby can't form. They have to work in unity and harmony together to form the placenta, where the baby will be housed for 9 months. And then when the baby's gone, so is the placenta. It's a temporary organ. Beautiful design of God. And that picture of that bond that's taking place to me is so incredibly beautiful. And again, we don't even know it until we don't even know the baby's there oftentimes until, that placenta's done being created.
It sure takes us back to Psalm 139, doesn't it? We are fearfully and wonderfully made. It's just
Yes.
amazing the way God has created all of this to work. And I love your word bond because as women that are helping women recover from abortion, we understand that that bond is there whether they recognize it or not.
Right.
And we think of it in perhaps an emotional way, but today we could see scientifically that there's actually a physiological bond, and we
Yeah.
want to explore that a little bit.
Yeah. And you know that God designed those cells in the beginning of life, whether it's in the zygote or there's another term of life development that it's escaping me right at the top of uh, right at the moment. But those cells, they're alive. It's not just a clump of cells as though it's just sitting there. The baby cells are alive, and from the moment the egg and the sperm meet, they start multiplying, right, to form at what will become us as fully human the way we know us. But in those early stages, they're still living, they're still active, they're still
And the whole
working
the
with us.
whole aspect of the DNA itself, that we
Yeah.
are half of our DNA actually comes from our mothers. My mother just passed a few weeks ago, and we were looking back through her pictures, and somebody said, "Look at that. At 4, she looks just like you. I thought that
Yeah.
was a picture of you," you know?
Yeah.
And we have those genes that are passed on, that we get characteristics of our parents because half of our DNA came from them.
And isn't it interesting? Sometimes I stop and I think really deeply. I happen to be one of those deeper thinkers. And um, on the surface, this isn't really a deep thought, but when you stop and really think about it, I think it is. Like, gosh, I completely lost my train of thought. So we'll just cut this out. So I'm just thinking, my brain just went into the floor. Um, it is about, oh, so when you stop and think about this physiological bond, um, why is it that I love my children more than, say, you do, right?
Mm.
Why is it that you love your children more than I do? There is a deeper connection than just this is my child physical, right? There's an emotional, right? There's emotional heart connection, but there's a spiritual connection going on here. And so we might say that's obvious for women, right? Because we carry the baby and that kind of thing. But what about the fathers? I mean, I will never love your children the way your husband does, right? And while we
Hmm.
can form these deep attaching love bonds with like adoptive children and, sisterhood, friends, that kind of thing. This is just something on a much deeper level, like the, mothers who get up in the middle of the night before the baby cries. That was my case. And before my daughter would cry right after she was born, I'd be like, she's awake. And, you know, her dad was laying next to me. He's like, no, she's not. And then a second later, she'd cry.
Yeah.
And that's because I have a bond with her that nobody else does, right? It's a very
And
special bond.
physically, I mean, even in the animal world, I mean, here we have nothing spiritual involved
True.
at all, and yet you have mothers just automatically God, it's the way God has made the bodies to work, is that they care for their little ones, even to sacrifice themselves.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so going on to this topic of DNA, the other research that we're going to talk about is really, really fascinating. I mean, this is where the baby is sending its cells, his or her cells, into the mother. And these cells aren't just going into her and just kind of hanging out, right? They're not just winging it, if you will, just kind of floating around. They're actually implanting or lodging themselves in the different tissues in the mother. So, like this, what the C-section is, or breast tissue, or it can that these cells are actually, and they aren't just lodged there. They're actually they assume the function of the surrounding cells, and so they're very, very much living in you. And research is showing that those cells can help ward off cancers, help with C-section healing. Apparently they're helping with the spatial development for future siblings as well. They're somehow playing a role in that. So
Wow.
this concept is so beautiful, and they're saying that as early as 5 weeks the baby's starting to send these cells off into us. So when we have abortion, we quite literally are killing ourselves, and that's why it hurts so bad.
And it goes the other way too, that those of us that have born children, some of those cells, and it's a different DNA than my cell. My son's cells are still lodged in my body, and they're
Yes.
foreign cells. They're not the same DNA, and yet they God has allowed them to make a purpose. And that's why sometimes pregnancy can um, cure different diseases because I now have those child cells producing things in my body to help fight that disease.
Oh, such a fearfully and wonderfully made. I mean, that just takes that really to a whole new level when you think about it. God is
Absolutely.
knitting us together in our mother's womb. And while he's knitting us, if you will, like if I always, when I hear that, I imagine, the knitting things, whatever they're called, the tools. I'm not a knitter.
Needles.
Yeah, the
Yes.
needles. There you go. I can imagine him just in there knitting us together, sitting on a chair with his legs crossed, just humming away, that's my crazy brain. But he's also then knitting, if you will, taking those cells and then knitting them into us, you know, and using that same analogy. And
It's interesting, isn't it, that we use the terminology loosely, just in vernacular, that my child's a part of me,
yes,
things
yes,
like that. But literally, physically, there is a truth to it.
yeah, yeah. And it's really quite beautiful. And while this might bring sadness and tears to those who are struggling with an abortion wound and maybe even a fresh wound, I hope that someday it will bring comfort and knowing that your baby is with you, just kind of always with you, a part
Mm.
of you, and helping you. You don't deserve it. We don't deserve, this beautiful gift, but yet we're given it. God is gracious to give us this gift. And I hope that someday this can be a part of your healing as you're walking through this.
And the bonds aren't just physical, because of course our children have new heavenly created immortal bodies, glorified bodies now in
Yeah.
heaven. Um, but it is a spiritual bond as well, I believe. And
Oh,
that bond still exists as well, as we look forward to being reunited with them, that indeed they are a part of us still.
absolutely. I mean, when we think about women who come to us or who are in their 60s and 70s and they haven't really discussed it much, but they're still grieving, literally tears, that's because I think of a deeper physical, that's because of that spiritual bond.
Mhm.
These are women that have been in the church for decades and are still repenting of their sin, even though they know they're forgiven, right? They have that conflict going on in their mind and in
Because
their
they've never
spirit.
grieved
They've never grieved, right?
and had closure. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was inspired by the many conversations had through the years with women struggling from the emotional pain associated with abortion. Thank you for allowing us into your healing journey. Subscribe on major platforms where podcasts can be heard. Learn more about virtual abortion recovery healing at www.anevenplace.com. The link is in the show notes.